Number three, will politics take a left turn? Now, remember I said that politicians really love to spend money to be able to give their constituents what they want. And they're always grandiose ideas. I mean, who doesn't want free college? I mean, that sounds fantastic. The funny thing is that it exists already. Stanford put most of their curriculum online for free, and they had very few people sign up for it. So that's kind of an interesting fact. You can get so much education online, but with that said, there's still some really well. Let's just say if you're wanting the vote of the largest demographic today, which is the young people, millennials, the largest generation today, and then add the Gen Zers there. Well, yeah, if you want their vote, you're going to give them free college, promises of canceling your student loan debt. That'll get a vote. Kind of sounds like if you were running for student body president, you'd, you know, vote, you'd offer free beer every Friday or something. And of course, people are going to vote for you. So, what would happen if a politician were elected next year who was really on the far left in the same way that Trump is on the far right? Oftentimes when we have an extreme politician, then another extreme politician gets voted. So, we'll see how this plays out. And, how would that affect housing? How would that affect housing? That's the big question if we had a very far left Democrat in office next year. What we do know is we've seen rent controls. That is not good for landlords. It's really not good for the housing market in general. We could end up seeing more of that. We could see some effect on taxes, but overall, over the many years that we've had Republican or Democratic administrations, things have really not changed that much in the housing world. The 1031 exchange is still there. The tax benefits have been, challenged over and over again, but it's pretty much stayed the same. So I'm not too worried about it. I think no matter who's in office, they're just trying to get votes. But at the end of the day, I think they really do understand that in order to have rental housing, you need to have landlords who are making a profit, and you can't make it too darn hard on them. And many of these politicians are real estate owners and investors, and they don't want to, you know, hurt their own investments. So that's just my thought on that. But what we have seen, and this is why there is a possibility that we could have a big shift, is the tax cuts. Not only did they not necessarily help boost the GDP too much, but they really only benefited the wealthy, even though we've kind of heard otherwise. But this is from the Tax Policy Center, kind of showing that the bottom 20% didn't get that much of a tax break. The middle class got a little bit. The top 20% got a really nice benefit, and the top 1% and top 0.1%, really have benefited. And that's going to upset a lot of people once this information gets out. You'll see more votes on the left, who are not happy about this. So again, we just have to pay attention and not make assumptions that we know who's going to be president next year. Number four, tariffs. Where's that headed? We haven't necessarily seen inflation in this country. We've, over the past year, which is interesting considering all the money supply and the increase in money supply from all the quantitative easing. There's the money supply is large, but the velocity of it, the movement of it, has not been as high. So we haven't really had as robust an economy. We've had kind of a moderate economy. But even though people say that it's the longest expansion in history, expansions don't have a timeline or a time limit. They don't have an end date. So it's really something else that causes the expansion to end. So what would it be? Is it these tariffs that would do it? Well, so far it really hasn't had too much of an effect. Prices haven't gone up that much, except on some of these things in housing. But the real costs of housing, the cost of housing has gone up so much, it really has to do more with lack of supply. And it also has to do with the fact that builders haven't built as much as they should to keep up with demand. So with all of this, does it still make sense to be a landlord moving forward? Is it time to sell everything? Is it time to build a portfolio? What should you be doing to protect yourself given some of these headwinds? Now, what we do know is that oversupply, I mean, really at the end of the day, economics come down to supply and demand, when you really boil it down. But there's different factors that cause that oversupply or undersupply. Now, back in 2004 and 2005, we had way oversupply of building. And that's because it was so easy for a builder to go get a loan to build homes. I mean, they could they could just buy some land and get a loan and build a bunch of houses and pay themselves a salary for building those houses. And if there was no profit, it was no okay, they already got paid. So lots and lots of building. And it was so easy for them to sell those homes because anyone could fill out a piece of paper and get a loan and get that house and basically lie about their income and or I'll put no income down on there. I mean, it was so easy. So there was a massive oversupply of building back then. And then when suddenly the obvious happened, I mean, it was should have been no surprise that people who totally couldn't make the payment when they got the loan suddenly couldn't make the payment when the payment was due. I mean, really, this should not have been so surprising to people. But when it came time for these people to pay their payment on their new home, they couldn't because they never could have qualified to begin with. And of course, we saw the housing slump and builders just stopped building. I mean, so many builders got foreclosed on, and just banks didn't want to lend because they got really hurt from that. So we had several years where building just was a quarter of what it was before. And yet all this time we had a growing population. So a growing population for a while, for the first years, it probably made up for all the overbuilding. But by 2012, we really had more people than housing. And then when we had the economy pick up right around 2012, 2013, more people were getting jobs, more households being formed, people moving out on their own, the millennials coming online, graduating, going out into the workforce, wanting, their own place to live in, not mom and dad's couch or the basement. Um, so suddenly, without the new builds and all these new households, we ran into a supply and demand issues. And builders are still not up and running the way that they have been in the past. And even those who are and are able to acquire the land is much more expensive. The cost of build is so much more expensive. The labor costs are expensive because there's just not enough workers out there for the job openings. We are not risking an oversupply this time. There's not an oversupply of new homes or housing in general. In fact, there's a desperate need for housing. Again, here's the slide on those household formations and the population growth. And what's interesting is since the last recession, we have seen about 24 million new Americans. Our population has grown by about 24 million. What's interesting is that we've had a growth of 23 million rental households in that time and only 678,000 new homeowners. So what does this mean? It means that with all that population growth that we've had in the past 10 years or so, most of those people have been renters, not owners. So kind of interesting. Now, why would that be? And where are they going? This is a John Burns slide. I probably showed it many times, and I'm sure you've seen it. This was projected from 2016 to 2026 that there would be 7.2 million more renters and 5.3 million more homeowners. But where? You could see most now. John Burns does a lot of demographic research. He's a consultant for home builders. He consults some of our projects that we have, and he's just really there's so much great data. If you go to realestateconsulting.com, you'll get lots of data there. But this is one of his slides, and you can see that with the demographic shifts happening, more people will be moving to the Southeast, Texas, and Florida. Now, why? Well, one big reason I'm sure that you can see just by looking at it, these are no state income tax states, and they also have low property taxes and low cost of living. When you have 10,000 baby boomers wanting to retire every day, that's real attractive to go to a place that's affordable, that's warm and sunny, that has a lot of amenities, lots of things to do, and the cost of living is so much less. So, but interestingly enough, a lot of the baby boomers are the fastest growing rental population. Very interesting. I think that might be because they can sell their home that has equity in it, and now they have a bunch of money that they don't want sitting kind of as dead equity in a house. They maybe want to invest that and kind of rent and just live off the equity as their retirement. So that may be why that segment is renting more. But we also are seeing that the millennials are forced to rent because were kind of behind. They started in the workforce during the housing recession, so they were kind of behind on their savings. Many of them have student loan debt. I'll talk about that in a minute. But what we've seen today is there are more jobs than there are people who want them. So we have a labor shortage today, and that's interesting. The whole plan for President Trump was to create more jobs, but in fact, we have too many jobs and just not enough workers to take them. And those workers, the labor force participation is improving, but it's nowhere near where it was 10 years ago. And that is because we have the baby boomers retiring. If we went back to before that, before they were retiring, we would have 7 million more people in the labor force. And those people are not coming back. And more will be leaving the workforce. So even if we did have a recession and there was massive job losses, we have so many more jobs than there are workers that it may not have a huge impact. Again, we don't know for sure, but supply and demand, boy, you'd have to have a major recession and a huge loss of jobs for it to really affect the housing market. Now we know that home prices have gone up steadily. They're past their last peak. We also know that consumer debt is up. Look at that. People love spending money. And of course, the student loan debt, now it takes 21 years to pay off a loan, and there's 44 million borrowers. A lot of people say that millennials can't buy homes because of their student loan debt. Well, not all millennials have too much debt. I think it's like 30% don't have any student loans at all. Maybe they never went to college, or their parents paid for their school, or they went to a junior college or online, whatever. There's a lot of millennials who don't have this problem. They don't have the student loans, but they might have car loans and other loans that's causing debt. But there is a very large amount of students who have massive debt, and up to 1 trillion in debt. And for many, it's taking 10 to 20% of their income to pay it off once they get out of college. It used to be just 5% in the 80s. So there's a very large segment of Americans who will not be able to buy because of this debt. The debt to income ratios are thrown off when they go to apply for a loan, especially if they also took on other debt like car loans and credit cards and stuff. They just simply cannot qualify for a loan, even if they could afford the mortgage payment, because their rent is probably close to that mortgage payment and they can pay the rent. So they could probably pay the mortgage, but their debt to income ratios are way off. So that really brings us to where we are today, that we have a growing renter population. It's become kind of the new normal to rent. There's no judgment if you're renting versus owning. In fact, a lot of people today think it's smarter to rent than own. So we have just a huge population wanting to rent. If you're a landlord and you want a safe place to put your money in uncertain times, as long as you're investing in an area that has really strong job growth, really strong population growth, and in my opinion, also has infrastructure growth. It's a city that's investing in itself, like Atlanta and Dallas and Houston and Jacksonville and Orlando, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Detroit. These are areas where billions of dollars are being poured into revitalization of the cities and growth. So if you can get into an area where there's job growth and population growth and infrastructure growth, but there's affordability today. In other words, the average person can afford the average home, except for the debt that they have, then even with job losses, you're probably going to be okay. And let me just give you an example, which I'll talk about later. Back in 2006, when I had Robert Kiyosaki on the Real Wealth Show, I didn't really understand market cycles, or I certainly didn't quite understand what was going on in the mortgage industry. I mean, I knew something was off. I didn't understand how you could give a loan to someone who had no proof of paying it, ability to pay it back. But it was Kiyosaki who just pointed out the obvious that, you know what, they're not going to be able to pay it back. They could never qualify to begin with. They lied on their loans. And when it comes time to pay, they're not going to be able to. So he said the best thing you can do is sell the bubble properties in California and Florida and Arizona and Nevada at the time. Those were the bubble markets. Sell those and get into Texas, where there was massive job growth and population growth, infrastructure growth, new freeways coming in, new buildings, new corporate headquarters, but the housing prices had not gone up. In fact, they were 27% undervalued, meaning that more people could afford, their salaries were going up faster than home prices. I mean, what a perfect storm. So, we helped hundreds, if not thousands of people sell their bubble property and exchange it for properties in Dallas. And then when the housing crash happened, it didn't happen in Dallas because there was so much job and population growth. Instead, rents went up and prices have tripled since then. So people who repositioned themselves just to protect themselves from the coming storm fared very, very well versus those who kept the bubble properties and lost, half or more of their equity. So we have that opportunity today to just take a look at your portfolio and make sure that your properties are in areas with strong job growth, that you've got, that you've got plenty of cash flow to cover the the costs, and that you've got plenty of reserves, set aside for repairs and potential vacancies, even though I don't really see vacancies as a big problem in areas where there is strong job growth and where the demographics are going, like the Southeast. So I'm going to be giving a little bit more data and information at our upcoming event on January 11th in San Mateo and January 12th in LA. You can go to realwealthnetwork.com and click on the Learn tab, and you'll see our upcoming events. They sell out really quickly, even though it's free. I mean, people reserve their seats, and we only have a certain number of seats. So be sure to sign up right away. It's one of our most popular events of the year. I'll be giving a more in-depth look at the 2020 housing market and the economy and the best strategies. Should you be a lender? Should you be in syndications, apartment, single family? What's the best place for your money? Senior housing, student housing, all the different options that are out there. So I'll be sharing that at the January event, and my husband and co-CEO, Rich Fettke, will be doing his Focused Investor presentation, which is really helping you get clear on your goals for 2020 and beyond, and both personally and professionally. And we always get really, really great feedback from that. It's a really powerful presentation. And we'll also be talking about some new loan programs we have and some new syndications. So you want to definitely sign up, need to be a member in order to go to those events and learn about those projects, which you can do again at realwealthnetwork.com.